The House will be in order. The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., June 6, 2023. I hereby appoint the Honorable Mary E. Miller to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 9th, 2023, the chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The chair will alternate recognition between the parties with time equally allocated between the parties, and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes, but in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Today I rise in recognition of Caribbean American Heritage Month. This June, we acknowledge and celebrate our diverse Caribbean American contributions to this nation's history for the 17th year. Personally, I am so proud of my Caribbean lineage and want to honor the universal pride that all Caribbean people share across the United States. Historically, Caribbean Americans have been key players in the development, growth, and richness of this country. Originally entering the United States in bondage, Caribbean people endured the brutality of chattel slavery for centuries, but fought for and attained liberation. My home, the Virgin Islands of the United States, and Haiti are the only two places who organized a slave revolt that led to successful freedom from that revolt in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Caribbean American history is one of struggle and of triumph. Descendants of these heroes and heroines would later search for greater opportunities here on the mainland as well as elsewhere. And wherever we have gone, we've led to become pioneers and revolutionaries of our times. Some of the most influential Caribbean American figures have undisputably driven change and progress in this nation and continuously aid in its endeavors to achieve freedom and prosperity. Our unique and colorful cultures, traditions, and stories have enriched and helped transform U.S. history, such as the invaluable contributions in government, academia, athletics, business, the arts and sciences, and so many more which have shaped the fabric of this nation. Members of our leadership, such as Colin Powell, descendant of Jamaican parents, who shattered racial barriers as the first Black National Security Advisor, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Secretary of State, the son of Jamaican immigrants. He was a decorated Army general, awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom twice, following the footsteps of that first notable Caribbean American, Alexander Hamilton. Susan Rice, Shirley Chisholm, and of course, our present Vice President, Kamala Harris, all share Caribbean heritage and have served this country as political figures. We honor them and the legacy they have left. Journalists like Karine Jean-Pierre, who is the first Black and Caribbean American ever to become a press secretary for U.S. President, others such as Joy Reid, Yumi Shalcindor, Abby Phillip. These are Caribbean American women who continue to disrupt the media by uplifting and amplifying Black voices. Our contributions are not limited to those within the rule of law. Caribbean Americans have a long history of social activists, free thinkers, revolutionaries. Everyone recalls Denmark Vesey, who led the slave revolt in South Carolina, a free man who died to free others. Hubert Harrison, a fellow Virgin Islander and New Yorker, who was often left in the shadows, was considered the father of Harlem radicalism. Men like Malcolm X, whose mother was from Grenada, Marcus Garvey of Jamaica, Kwame Ture, formerly known as Stokely Carmichael, founder of the Black Panthers from Trinidad, and James Wendell Johnson, who wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing, whose family was from the Bahamas, played crucial roles in the civil rights movement. They left lasting impacts on this country. Caribbean Americans' experience has inspired countless works of art. A people rich in imagination, they are continuously at the forefront of exceptional and innovative artistic expression. Jean-Michel Pasquat, a Haitian and Puerto Rican descent, was a leading figure in the neo-expressionism movement. Musicians and actors such as Harry Belafonte, Cicely Tyson, Hazel Scott are visionaries in their field. We continue to credit much of our scientific advancements to individuals such as Neil deGrasse Tyson, whom everybody looks and applauds, the son of a beautiful Puerto Rican sister, a renowned astrophysicist, author, and science communicator, recognized for his, quote, extraordinary role in exciting the public about the wonders of science. In athletics, an abundance of individuals have had monumental success and shown grace and leadership, such as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, a son of Caribbean immigrants. Two in particular that I, of course, cannot stop mentioning from the Virgin Islands, Tim Duncan and Arlia Boston. This month provides an opportunity to reflect on the past, act in the present, and envision the future. We applaud Caribbean American Heritage Month. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Steele, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to commemorate an important milestone for the Vietnamese community in my district and across the United States. This week marks the 35th anniversary of Orange County's Little Saigon, which is now home of the largest concentration of Vietnamese anywhere outside of Vietnam itself. To this day, many of Little Saigon's residents are first-generation Vietnamese who fled communism to find freedom in this country. They brought with them a rich heritage, beautiful culture, and a proud history. They are small business owners, public servants, community leaders, educators, healthcare professionals, lawyers, journalists, parents, and everything in between. The Vietnamese community in Orange County is a shining example of a fundamental American truth that no matter who you are or where you come from, if you work hard and stay true to the principles of liberty and justice for all, you can achieve success for yourself and your family. Southern California and America are stronger because of their contributions. I am proud to represent Vietnamese Americans living in California's 45th district, and I'm committed to ensuring that each of them can build and enjoy their own American dream. Madam Speaker, I rise today in celebration of Filipino Independence Day. The history of Filipino independence is the story of a people who remained tirelessly committed to democratic values of self-determination and freedom, even amidst the most challenging circumstances. On June 12, 1898, the Philippines declared their independence after a long history of occupation. However, the country remained a territory of the United States for many years, even after Congress enacted the Philippine Independence Act of 1934. It wasn't until the 4th of July in 1946, when President Harry S. Truman issued Proclamation 2695, that the United States recognized Filipino sovereignty, officially marking the nation's independence. Both during and since its independence, the Philippines has been one of the United States' most important allies. My district in Southern California is home to around 30,000 Filipinos. They are an integral part of our communities, touching every aspect of our way of life with an entrepreneurial spirit, a respect for their traditions, and a love for America. I am proud to represent them in the United States Congress, and I will always fight for a better life for them and for all of my constituents. To the Filipino community in Southern California and across the country, I wish you a very happy Independence Day. Thank you, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise to demand justice for a family still in search of answers. Over 3 years after his murder, Army Specialist Enrique Roman Martinez's mother, Maria, and sister Griselda still don't know what happened to their beloved son and brother. Before he was even old enough to vote, Enrique felt called to serve for a purpose much greater than himself. His dedication to our nation compelled him to enlist in the Army when he was only 17 years old. While stationed at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, Specialist Roman Martinez went camping in the Outer Banks with 7 of his fellow soldiers. On May 22, 2020, he disappeared. 7 soldiers camping with him failed to report him missing. They failed to provide information that could lead to solving his murder. Instead, they claimed that he was suicidal. However, a week later, when his head surfaced, Specialist Roman Martinez was found washed ashore. Only his head. He was only 21 years old enough to order a beer for himself. He had the rest of his life ahead of him, a life he chose to begin by selfless serving his country. His family deserves the truth, and as the mother of an Air Force veteran, I will never forget that awful feeling of waking up every day and not knowing whether your son will ever come home. Our military makes a sacred commitment to never leave a service member behind, and it is their moral obligation to inform families if their loved one is killed. It is an impossible, unthinkable conversation, a conversation that I feared every single day during my son's deployment, but it is essential closure for the families of those who made the ultimate sacrifice. It has been over 3 years, and the murder of Enrique Roman Martinez remains unsolved. The Army's failure to provide his family with the answers they deserve is unacceptable. Last year, I introduced the Enrique Roman Martinez Military Cold Case Justice Act to reform how the military handles cold cases and ensure that a tragedy of uncertainty like this never happens again. And I am pleased that my legislation was included in our annual government's funding law that I recently had the opportunity to visit the new Army Cold Case Unit to monitor the Army's improvements to their cold case review process. But the harsh truth remains. Enrique's family is still waiting for answers they may never find, and still waiting for the remains they may never find. I call on anyone with information on Enrique Roman Martinez's murder to come forward and shed the light on what happened. And as the Roman Martinez family's voice in Congress, I will continue doing all that I can to deliver justice for them. Enrique was one of the Inland Empire's best and brightest, and we feel the pain for his loss every single day. Maria and Griselda's lives will never be the same after the murder of their son and brother, and the very least that we can do is grant them closure. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have a massive problem. We just got done talking about the budget and talking about the deficit, but there is no possible way to address that without addressing health care. Health care is the biggest spending item for the government. One out of every $5 spent by the government is spent on health care, and it is the quickest growing inflationary cost to Americans. Right now, if you consider Medicaid and Medicare, you consider the amount of money we spend on private pay, which is about 1/5 the economy also. In a GDP of roughly $24 trillion, you're spending $6 trillion on healthcare alone. If it were taken by itself, it would be the third largest GDP in the world. It would have twice the GDP size of India, which has 1.47 billion people. This is a massive problem. So what are we going to do? How do we take on something so complex? I think it's an underserved problem in the United States Congress. We've been kicking the can down the street for far too long, both from the Clinton administration all the way through the Obama administration. The Affordable Care Act did nothing to make it affordable. We've done nothing to curb the inflationary costs. And it's certainly not the doctors' problem, because doctors took a 2.3% pay cut last year alone. If you're an ER doctor in Georgia, you probably took about an 18% pay decrease in 1 year. And that's after serving during COVID for 3 years, on nights, weekends, and holidays. That is your congratulations. So how do we address this? Quite frankly, we're going to have to make some hard choices. And America has to understand, first of all, how complex this issue is. When you have PBMs, GPOs, pharmaceutical companies, insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare, when you have the government involved, private pay, when you have hospital systems, when you have healthcare providers. These are just some of the problems we have. Right now we have 90% of the ingredients that go into drugs produced in China. You have almost all of the market for amoxicillin and Augmentin cornered by an adversarial nation. We have admin costs that have grown in the hospital system from 25% to 40% just in the last 10 years. Take that into account. 40% of every dollar spent on healthcare is spent on administrative costs. That means too much regulatory burden. That means not enough competition. And we continue to talk about a single-payer system as the end-all, be-all to healthcare. Let's take that into account right now. Medicaid is done at a loss. It doesn't pay the bills. As a matter of fact, we have an act right now that talks about supplementing people with a tax break so that they can actually see more Medicaid patients and afford it and stay open. It's not the answer. If we go to a single-payer system, you're talking about adding $30 trillion of expense to the government in the next 10 years. That means $30 trillion more in either tax or debt. We've pretty much lost our minds over $32 trillion of debt that we're already in. Imagine adding $32 trillion more to spending. It would be the largest increase in spending and government control there's ever been in American history. We have a massive problem. On top of that, despite spending about $32 billion on electronic medical records and spending a lot of money on coders, we still have 45% in many cases of claims not being reimbursed by insurance companies. This simply can't continue to happen. People are using their insurance companies the wrong ways. If we use car insurance the same way we use healthcare insurance, you'd be spending your car insurance to actually change your car oil, and it would probably cost about $500 per pop, and you wouldn't be able to afford car insurance. We need to look at this in a different way. The problem is, if I talk about cutting administrative costs to medicine, people will immediately vilify me for trying to cut Medicaid and Medicare. This is why it has to be a bipartisan issue. We have to have a real conversation, and it can't be about calling people names, but about actually solving a problem. If we want to talk about a real solution, I think we have to start thinking about not just taking this as subcommittees, not just a subcommittee of E&C, not just a subcommittee of Ways and Means, not just a subcommittee of VA or a subcommittee of Foreign Affairs, but we actually have to have staff that are dedicated to a process that's so complex, so big, has so many lobbyists involved, that it's almost impossible for a physician with an MBA to figure out how to handle it himself. This is something we're going to have to take as a problem that all of us have to solve without vilifying each other. And if we don't do it soon, we will increase government, increase spending, and we will have rationing simultaneously. If
The
you don't
gentleman's
want,
time is up.
final point, if you want a good example of single-payer system, the VA is exactly what you're going to get. And it's not popular. With that, I yield.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
I thank the Speaker. Today I rise to acknowledge June 6, 1944, D-Day, the largest land, sea, and amphibious air came to Normandy to fight Hitler. It was an unbelievable surge of power for freedom. And I had just a few years ago the privilege of commemorating D-Day at Normandy, and to be able to see the rows and rows of those who died in the name of freedom. 9,000 of the Allies died, men and women, men in particular from the United States of America. And so I honor them today and recognize that as we stand in this place, as we debate on this floor, we have the responsibility to pay tribute to why they fought for freedom and their love of America. We have the responsibility to do the right thing for the American people. That's why I stand today to raise the issue that has plagued us over and over again, and that is the enormity of gun violence, the proliferation of guns, and the loss of life of our children. Every single day, violence is impacting our children. Yesterday, we held a powerful hearing to talk about how we can stop this gun violence. And we heard from people who were victims, like Lloyd Gach, a victim of the Monterey shooting. And his words rang so powerfully. 42 gunshots he heard, and he heard the bodies dropping, 11 dead and 9 wounded. He understands that a weapon of war should not be on the streets and that we should ban assault weapons. We also heard from medical testimony or professional health testimony that indicated that storage, like the Kimberly Vaughn storage bill, would be most helpful in saving the lives of children. Some 4 million children live in homes where guns are laid around and not stored. They lose their lives there. But every single day, a child loses her life, 8 children a day, by way of gun violence. What about Mr. Kling from the Giffords organization that says 6,500 veterans die every year to gun violence, to suicide? It is imperative that we understand that that weapons of choice is a gun. Or some would say they're suicidal, they have mental issues. It is the proliferation of guns. And so, red flag laws, banning the assault weapons, raising the age. We all still feel the pain of many shootings, but we feel the pain of Uvalde. I've known those families, I've come to know them, and the elected officials there that have been in pain, the city that's been in pain, again, the families and children remain in pain. You see how many of these small caskets they had to watch being buried in that community with a child, yes, under the age of 21, got a gun online. How outrageous is that? And so I stand here today saying, Are we going to keep the promise of those who laid their lives on the line for a free nation? Or are we going to continually be against what is right? And let me quickly indicate that we must do something about the massive evictions across America. People are unhoused and need more housing. The high numbers of eviction in all of our communities, I want to fight against, and will introduce legislation dealing with eviction. I want to bring it down in Houston and cities around the nation. And as well, I want to make sure that whatever rights we have, all people deserve the same rights, and that is access to freedom and justice and equality, and to recognize their diversity and access to health care. It was the Democrats who saved Medicaid, where 1 million people were going to lose their Medicaid had we followed the leadership of our friends on the other side of the aisle with their early bill, H.R. 1. 1 million people, but we stopped it with stopping the default and negotiating away the idea of taking 1 million people off of Medicaid, their lifeline for health care. It is extremely important that we recognize that men and women lay down their life or put on the uniform unselfishly. They do so
The
so that
gentlewoman's
freedom
time has
can
expired.
be for every American. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Michigan, Ms. Tlaib, for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, yesterday I was honored to join Rosa Parks' family alongside Senator Gary Peters and local community advocates to rename the Grand River Post Office near her home in Detroit the Rosa Louise Macaulay Parks Post Office. I'm so proud to recognize the mother of the civil rights movement and a beloved resident of our community in Detroit, Mother Rosa Parks. It was truly a personal honor to partner with Mother Parks' family to keep this freedom fighter's legacy alive in yet another powerful way. I cannot wait for the child to walk in to see the name on the post office and ask, who was that? It was a privilege to lead this effort in Congress with support of the Michigan delegation to commemorate this incredible civil rights leader. As we know, on December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks refused to surrender her seat on a Montgomery bus to a white passenger. Her refusal not only was an act of courage and a protest of racial segregation and oppression, Madam Speaker, it was an assertion that our black neighbors deserved human dignity. Her act of defiance ignited the Montgomery bus boycott, a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement. In 1957, Mother Parks left Montgomery, Alabama to move to the most beautiful blackest city in the country, the city of Detroit, where she lived there nearly 50 years and served our community tirelessly as a congressional staff member for the late Congressman John Conyers. Despite efforts that we're seeing today around the nation of those who want to erase history leaders like Mother Rosa Parks, Dr. King, Malcolm X, and so many others, we will continue to uplift those who bent the arc of moral universe towards justice. And today and always, Madam Speaker, we stand on the shoulders of Mother Parks and the countless others who fought for equality and justice for all. I am inspired every single day by her bravery and strength. Her legacy serves as a powerful reminder to every single one of us that with courage and determination, there is power to change the course of our history. May Mother Parks always remind us that we cannot remain silent when we encounter injustice, discrimination, or racism, that we must always take a stand and speak out, even when our voice shakes. To continue to build on her most beautiful movement to build a more equitable, loving, and just world. We know that our struggle against racism, Madam Speaker, and white supremacy is a lifelong pursuit. As Mother Parks wrote, freedom fighters never retire. And as her memory continues to guide us, may her legacy never die. I am so grateful for the opportunity to honor Mother Parks alongside the Macaulay and Parks families, and hope that this symbol of our appreciation is felt by those that loved her. Madam Speaker, I was blessed to have grown up in Southwest Detroit. This is where over 20 different ethnicities live, and every neighborhood has their own flavor in how they show up for each other. This is why I'm so grateful that I secured $1.5 million in funding for the American Indian Health and Family Services as they expand their health care and mental health services to our families. This healthcare center is tucked in a residential street between homes where people can walk to get the service that they need. Expanding their efforts will change lives in a meaningful way, and I'm so proud to have been part of that. Madam Speaker, auto insurance discrimination continues to keep our residents in the cycle of poverty. Your education level, your zip code, and marital status doesn't determine your driving ability, and neither does your credit score. Yet our neighbors, especially in Detroit, regularly face higher auto insurance rates, up to $5,000 per month in some cases. Someone with a perfect driving record and poor credit can pay up to 2 or 3 times more than those with a higher credit score, even with drinking under the influence violation. We must stop. We must stop these predatory and discriminatory practices by auto insurance companies. I'm so grateful to partner with Congresswoman Watson-Coleman and Congressman Takano in introducing Prohibiting Auto Insurance Discrimination Act. This is how we can push back against corporate greed and those that use proxies to discriminate. With that, Madam Speaker, I yield.
Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until noon today.
Back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House floor for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. June is National Dairy Month, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all dairy farmers in the Central Valley for their commitment to supplying America with dairy products we all know and love. If you're a fan of cheese, ice cream, yogurt, or just a good old-fashioned glass of cold milk, there's a pretty good chance it was produced in California's 22nd district. California is the #1 producing state in the country, housing over 1,100 dairies, and 99% of those are family-owned. 80% of California's 1.7 million milk cows live in the Central Valley, with Tulare County alone housing about 450,000. As a representative for America's largest dairy-producing counties and Congress's only dairy farmer, I know firsthand the challenges that men and women in the dairy industry face every day. But like all our agriculture producers in the Valley, dairy farmers continue to produce America's dairy products, care for their animals, and support their local communities. I ask all my colleagues to join me in raising a glass of milk to our dairy farmers as we celebrate National Dairy Month. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Virginia seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to extend my remarks for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlelady is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to recognize Major General Timothy P. Williams. For the last 9 years, Major General Williams has served as the 28th Adjutant General of Virginia, displaying an unparalleled dedication to the members of the Virginia National Guard, the Virginia Air National Guard, and the Virginia Defense Force. He has built a reputation of steady leadership in a time so often marked by turbulence. His soldiers and airmen were on the front lines of the COVID-19 crisis, completing more than 1,100 missions in response to the pandemic. During his tenure, the Virginia National Guard deployed to the U.S. Capitol following the January 6th insurrection. And later that year, his service members helped evacuate thousands of our Afghan allies to safety. Under the leadership of Major General Williams, Virginia soldiers have also deployed to Kuwait, the Horn of Africa, Iraq, Syria, Kosovo, and many more places. While Major General Williams will officially retire on July 1st, his service is not done, and I am confident that his resiliency, his devotion to duty, and his fervent patriotism will continue to inspire generations of brave Virginians who wish to lead from the front as he continues his service to our Commonwealth and the country. Please join me in extending our country's gratitude to Major General Timothy P. Williams for his service. Madam Speaker, I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Missouri seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, I rise today to once again express my sincere support for AM radio. Yesterday, my good friend and Rep. Jake LaTurner of Kansas and I led a bipartisan resolution promoting the use of AM radios in automobiles. Not only is AM radio a pillar of our communication infrastructure, but it is a beacon of our resilience and representation of our unity as a nation. It connects us, it informs us, and at times it has saved us. 1 in 5 Americans regularly turn to a radio station for their local news, and nearly half of all adults in our great nation derive part of their news from radio broadcasts. Not TV, not social media, but radio. Our AM radio stations reach a staggering monthly audience of 82 million Americans. This is not a voice whispering in the void. This is a loudspeaker that broadcasts to the masses, a reliable source of news and information to tens of millions of citizens. Let's keep the airwaves alive, folks. Let's keep the people informed. Let's keep AM radio in our cars and trucks. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Madam Speaker, the United States is experiencing an affordable housing crisis, and Western New York is not immune. Older communities like Buffalo and Niagara Falls have aging housing with good bones, but the high cost to rehab these properties compared with their value causes them to fall into disrepair. As a result, neighborhoods are plagued by blighted homes and vacant lots. That's why we introduced the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, which closes the value gap these neighborhoods face with a tax credit to encourage investing in single-family homes to revitalize these communities. Over the last 10 years, this bill could help build or rehabilitate 500,000 homes and create more than 700,000 construction jobs. For the families whose dreams of home ownership feel unattainable, this can be a game changer. I ask my colleagues to join myself and Representative Mike Kelly in supporting this legislation for communities across the nation and the families that want to see them thrive long into the future. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Ms. Speaker. I take this opportunity to address a very important visit by Prime Minister Modi this week. I'm excited that this person is coming to America to extend our goodwill between our two nations in one of the most strategically important relationships we have in the world. If you consider their relationship to Pakistan, China, Bangladesh, and the economic power that they hold, an economy that's been blossoming in the last 10 years that has increased by over 30%, where Canada and Russia has actually maintained a flat or decreasing GDP. The reason this has happened is because they've embraced a constitution very similar to the United States and values very similar to ours. I call that we continue to extend our military actions, our military purchasing power, and our economic reliance on each other into the future as we accept Prime Minister Modi here in the United States and in the most important accolades that we recognize leadership across the world. Thank you, and with that I yield.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and
Without
extend
objection,
my
the
remarks.
gentlelady is now recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. I rise today to recognize and congratulate one of my constituents, Easton's own Okezue Bell. A Moravian Academy graduate, Okezue is making a mark not just on Pennsylvania 7, my district, but on the entire country and our world. He created We Arm, a prosthetic limb for below-the-elbow amputees that has reached more than 4,000 people. He founded an award-winning app called Fitudem that offers microloans to unbanked, low-infrastructure communities. He is a United Nations Youth Delegate for Climate Justice, Environmental Sustainability, and Education, working on educational initiatives for underprivileged students across the globe. And he somehow still has the time to be a standout violinist and tennis championship winner. I was honored to celebrate his graduation with him this past weekend, and I cannot wait to see what he does next, because his intelligence, curiosity, and dedication to making the world a better place represents the best that this country has to offer. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield back.
Thank you. For what purpose does the gentleman from Kentucky seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 463 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 23, House Resolution 463. Resolved that any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 277, to amend Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code to provide that major rules of the executive branch shall have no force or effect unless a joint resolution of approval is enacted into law. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-6 shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 2. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 288 to amend Title 5 United States Code to clarify the nature of judicial review of agency interpretations of statutory and regulatory provisions. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-7 shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. 2. The further amendment printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution, if offered by the member designated in the report, which shall be in order without intervention of any point of order, shall be considered as read, shall be separately debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. And 3. One motion to recommit. Section 3. At any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1615 to prohibit the use of federal funds to ban gas stoves. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in Part C of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 4. At any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1640 to prohibit the Secretary of Energy from finalizing, implementing, or enforcing the proposed rule titled Energy Conservation Program, Energy Conservation Standards for Consumer Conventional Cooking Products, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in Part D of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit.
The gentleman from Kentucky is now recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Representative Scanlon, pending which I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time is yielded for the purpose of debate only. Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
Last night, the Rules Committee met and reported House Resolution 456, providing for the consideration of 4 measures, H.R. 27, H.R. 288, H.R. 1650, and H.R. 1640. The rule provides for H.R. 277, the Regulations in Need of Scrutiny Act, also known as the REINS Act, to be considered under a structured rule and provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule makes 15 amendments in order. The rule provides further for H.R. 288, the Separation of Powers Restoration Act, to be considered under a structured rule and provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Judiciary or their respective designees. The rule makes 1 amendment in order. Additionally, the rule provides for H.R. 1615, the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act, to be considered under a structured rule and provides 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or the respective designees. The rule makes 2 amendments in order. Finally, the rule provides for H.R. 1640, the Save Our Gas Stoves Act, to be considered under a structured rule and provides for 1 hour of general debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. The rule makes 3 amendments in order. I reserve.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is now recognized.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Kentucky for yielding the customary 30 minutes. With all the very real issues facing our great nation, it's really disappointing that once again the House majority has decided to waste valuable time and resources to promote a bunch of half-baked legislative ideas and stir the culture wars pot with MAGA conspiracy theories. The bills that we started considering yesterday in the Rules Committee and will debate and vote upon in the next couple days, consuming an entire week of scarce legislative time, will do nothing to address the most pressing issues our constituents are begging us to address: gun violence, affordable health and child care, the growing impact of climate change, Social Security solvency, immigration, national security, and worse, the anti-government philosophy inspiring these bills will ultimately harm Americans by creating dangerous bottlenecks in critical government functions, misrepresenting the role and actions of the federal government, and disrupting the government's ability to protect Americans from harm. So let's get some facts straight. While our colleagues across the aisle have framed their argument as necessary to ensure that Congress exercises its legislative function, they completely ignore the fact that the federal agencies and rulemaking processes they're attacking have been established by Congress to undertake specific functions. That includes rulemaking, which is delegated to the agencies by Congress and ensures that they implement policies using the best and most recent expertise available for the benefit of the American people. By enlisting the assistance of federal agencies to administer the laws that it passes, Congress fulfills its constitutional mandate, the mandate for our entire government to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to our colleagues. In other words, working together with the other branches, our government is charged with accomplishing certain basic goals for the American people. The regulatory process that our colleagues seek to frame as a battle against a vast bureaucratic conspiracy is actually an essential part of ensuring that we all have clean air and water to breathe and drink, healthy food to eat, safe planes, trains, and automobiles to travel in. In reality, regulations mean that when a senior goes to the pharmacy to pick up their prescriptions, the life-saving medication that they'll take is both safe and effective. When you boil it down, rules and regulations are extremely tangible ways that the federal government protects people's health and safety and helps create a fairer economy where everyone has the chance to succeed. Subject matter experts at agencies craft these regulations, many based on highly complex and technical data. Once a rule is proposed, it undergoes an often years-long rigorous review in which comments are solicited from the public, business interests, and other agencies. And of course, these rules and regs are issued in response to congressional directives. They're an important step towards implementing laws that members of this body have passed while representing the people back home who elect them to come here. And we can see examples of successful rulemaking all the time across the country. Before the Clean Water Act, the Delaware River, which runs alongside my district, was so polluted that it stripped the paint off passing ships. These days, you can safely kayak on the river thanks to regulations developed by agencies to carry out that law. While the regulatory process can always be improved upon, the proposals we're considering today are not good faith improvements or efforts to provide checks upon the regulatory process. The first of these bills is H.R. 277, the REINS Act, which would turn the administrative rulemaking process on its head, requiring every major rule, of which there are dozens and sometimes hundreds every year, to be passed again by both houses of Congress and signed by the President. Remember, these rules have been developed in the first instance as a result of congressional action. So what the REINS Act is really doing is creating a process that will cause gridlock that then Republicans or other political operatives can take advantage of to stop rules they don't like. The burdensome requirements of H.R. 277 are simply not needed because Congress already has multiple opportunities to shape or rescind major rules if it disapproves of them. We can hold hearings and offer public comment. We can disapprove major regulations before they take effect. Or we can rescind those regulations under the Congressional Review Act. On the last point in particular, I'll note that this majority has moved these types of measures through this chamber already many times this Congress. In addition, we can also pass legislation to change laws or regulations if we so please. And of course, we're considering bills today to do just that. I know my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are aware of the avenues through which Congress can review and reverse rules. I know it because they use them, or try to use them, week in and week out. So for them to paint a bill like the REINS Act as a noble effort to empower Congress, it's disingenuous. And ultimately, it diverts attention from the disastrous consequences this legislation would actually create. Effectively, the REINS Act nullifies all new rulemaking by any administration, whether Republican or Democrat, and it would bring government operations to a standstill. Any new regulation would have to be passed by Congress in order to take effect. So let's think about what that would really mean. A Congress with a House majority that would rather bring the country to the brink of default instead of paying bills that Congress has already approved would have to vote on every new major regulation from every federal agency. And if that doesn't scare you, the Senate, hardly a model of expeditious legislation, would need to do the same. In addition, the bill might actually be unconstitutional because it creates a mechanism in which one House of Congress can effectively veto an agency's rule by simply not acting on it within a 70-day legislative time frame. This, in effect, is indistinguishable from the one House legislative veto that the Supreme Court held to be unconstitutional in Immigration and Naturalization Service versus Chadha. The unfortunate truth is Congress struggles every day to meet the most pressing needs of the American people. There aren't enough hours in the day, year, or congressional term for us to weigh in on all the regulations that we would need to implement the laws that we are passing. Under this policy, crucial regulations would be left to languish unacted upon, and the health, safety, and welfare of the people we're supposed to serve would be in jeopardy. In addition to the REINS Act, there are 3 other bills that my colleagues are pushing through today, which would also undermine the regulatory process and threaten public welfare and safety. H.R. 288, the SOPR Act, eliminates the decades-long standard for judicial review of agency decisions. That's a precedent that rests in part on the understanding that Congress delegates to agencies certain authorities to carry out the laws that it passes. It's clear that all the talk on the other side of the aisle about this being to restore power to Congress is empty words, because this bill actually incentivizes unelected judges, not Congress, to make and enact policy from the bench. And ultimately, it would slow the rulemaking process and skew it towards more powerful, well-funded, and often corporate litigants, which may be the point. Finally, the 2 gas stove bills that our colleagues are pushing this week actually demonstrate some of the flaws in the REINS Act, chief among them the ready availability of alternatives to the REINS Act proposal and the dangers of politicizing the rulemaking process. H.R. 1615 and 1640 are fear-mongering attempts to prevent the enactment of standards to make gas stoves more safe and efficient, and would hinder agencies' abilities to address potentially dangerous consumer products. The majority's trumped-up battle to defend gas stoves from the federal government is nothing more than a conspiracy theory, cooked up to embroil Congress in culture wars that shed more heat than light on the issues facing our nation, and are likely done so with a healthy helping of fossil fuel lobbying dollars. Contrary to the heated rhetoric from our colleagues across the aisle, the federal government has not proposed to remove appliances from Americans' homes. That pervasive falsehood has been repeated for months by partisan hacks like Tucker Carlson to stoke grievances and cause chaos. H.R. 1640, the Save Our Stoves Act, nullifies new, congressionally mandated energy efficiency standards for gas stoves, for new gas stoves only, that would save consumers up to $1.7 billion in energy bills and cut down on emissions that are being shown to be particularly dangerous to children's health. Most of us are familiar with these energy efficiency standards, and we rely upon them when we purchase new appliances like stoves and freezers and furnaces. I know that I do, because it's the responsible thing to do as a consumer from both an environmental and an economic perspective. Contrary to my colleagues' assertions, half of the gas stoves on the market today would meet the standard, and the remainder would have 3 years to make the necessary and already available adjustments to bring their new stoves into compliance. H.R. 1615, the Gas Stoves and Freedom Act, is even worse because it threatens the government's ability to identify and regulate unsafe gas stoves, including those with design defects that could cause injury or death to American consumers. Just last year, the Consumer Product Safety Commission recalled a gas stove that had sent multiple people to the hospital and placed many more at serious risk of illness or death from carbon monoxide poisoning. This bill would have prevented the recall of that dangerous appliance and would prevent the Consumer Product Safety Commission from addressing other dangerous appliances in the future. It's simply irresponsible to jeopardize the health and safety of Americans in order to promote conspiracy theories for the far right. Overall today, my Republican colleagues take a misguided approach to the issues facing rulemaking and federal regulations. It's clear they don't want to make the government work better. They want to break it. They'd rather allow polluters and corporations to wreak havoc on our environment, children's health, and working people's livelihoods. They'd prefer to decimate a regulatory process that improves the lives of Americans every single day. The federal government has long played an important role in promoting the health, safety, and welfare of the American people, and we need to ensure that it can continue playing that role. I strongly oppose these bills, and I reserve the remainder of my time.
The gentlelady from Pennsylvania reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Our constituents didn't elect us to come here and eat fancy dinners and go from one fundraiser to the next, take lavish trips and rub elbows with important and famous people. They sent us here for one job: pass laws, or in some cases, repeal laws, set the rules under which they will live under, and then we are accountable every 2 years. The founders were very wise. Some people complain, but every 2 years, our constituents have a chance to replace us if the rules we've set aren't in their favor. They have no such choice with bureaucrats. Our founders didn't set this system up for bureaucrats to make the laws. Excessive regulation stifles economic growth, hurts small businesses, and raises consumer prices. In fact, much of the inflation that we see in the sectors of food and energy are due to overregulation. It's vital that Congress act to reduce our regulatory burden now, which raises consumer prices, reduces wages, and costs jobs. I think the American people watching this debate are somewhat vexed that the other side of the aisle says we need to give up more power to the executive branch when they sent us here to do something, and they wonder why we're so feckless so often. So they're probably shaking their heads. What are these other people talking about? That somebody else should make the rules that we live under. The REINS Act would require congressional approval for regulations that have a major impact on our economy of more than $100 million, or lead to a raise in consumer prices or adversely affect employment. If the REINS Act becomes law, every major regulation promulgated by the administration will come back to Congress for our approval. These regulations, they're not just regulations. These have the force of law. You can go to prison for 10 years, as we've seen with the regulation on pistol braces, just because some bureaucrat decided they wanted to pass a regulation. In fact, the jobs-crushing OSHA vaccine mandate was one of the things that we should have voted on. If you're going to do that to your constituents, vote on it. But we didn't. We let the executive branch do it. And the idea behind the REINS Act isn't novel. It's enshrined in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 1 of the U.S. Constitution says, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a House of Representatives and a Senate. Does it say, and a bureaucracy? No, it doesn't. Does it say, some legislative powers herein granted? No, it says all legislative powers herein granted are given to the Congress of the United States. Congress has delegated its authority to unaccountable federal agencies over the past decades, and our constituents are feeling that burden. Unelected bureaucrats do not have the constitutional authority to write laws, nor are they accountable to the people. They're career bureaucrats. Our Congress has this power, and ceding it to the federal agencies undermines our representative form of government. I'd now like to yield 2 minutes to my good friend, Dr. McCormick from Georgia.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm new to Congress, so maybe I don't see the same problems that other congressmen and congresswomen do. But I'll tell you one thing, I know the people. I have yet to hear one constituent say we need more regulation. I have nobody's telling me that they want the president to make universal decisions for all of us. The fact is, we're out of balance. Congress doesn't have the same power that it's supposed to have enumerated in the Constitution of the United States. The fact that we've made a president that can spend more money than we can save is the exact reason why I just voted against the lifting of the deficit cap. I can sum this up in one thing. You just said from the other side of the House, we just said, look, we make hundreds of rules by the bureaucracies, hundreds of rules per year. How can we address that in Congress? Well, that's exactly the problem. We spend half our time in Congress litigating and debating the rules that were made by bureaucracies. You're right, we don't have time for that. We don't have time to tell you that we shouldn't put people in jail for something that was made essentially law by a bureaucracy. We don't have time to fight over money that was given away by bureaucracies or spent by bureaucracies. We don't have time to fight a president in the Supreme Court because of a decision that he made without the approval of Congress when it comes to the budget, which we, by the Constitution, should have responsibility for. And with that, I yield.
The gentleman from Kentucky reserves. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Madam Speaker, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Since Austin, deep in the heart of fossil-fueled Texas, is the only place I've ever called home, I don't believe I've ever been in a home without a gas stove. But I certainly don't need any protection through this contrived bill, and neither does any other American. I don't need to save my stove because there's no federal bureaucrat out there about to turn off the burners and mandate cold meals forever. You know, after meddling in our bedrooms and in our bathrooms as if that weren't enough, now Republicans are turning their attention to our kitchens. Republicans propose in these bills to stop regulations that no agency has ever proposed. It follows the Republican playbook. The easiest problems to fix are those that don't exist in the first place, and they're very good at that. Pursuing this manufactured problem places this bill in the race for the silliest Republican bill of the year. But with culture warriors developing this kind of stuff all the time, that is an honor that is very competitive to get. Nonsense like these bills represent just another way of avoiding dealing with the genuine problems that our families and our country confront. There is a growing body of science that indicates that burning natural gas increases the chances of childhood asthma, can worsen pre-existing heart and lung issues, and using gas in the home, of course, like using it anywhere else, can involve methane leaks that are important as we deal with the climate crisis. This bill prohibits any consideration of science in the future, no matter what it shows or what improvements might be recommended for health and safety of those who are cooking on a stove or their families. Unfortunately, rejection of science is to be expected from a crowd of climate deniers who regularly prefer political mythology and ideology over reality. What we should be all concerned about is not how we're cooking on our stoves, but how our planet is cooking. It's overheating to a dangerous level. This bill is yet another indication of Republicans' rejection of science. Our families are already encountering the human health effects of climate change, tropical diseases we've never seen before, heat exhaustion, death and destruction from one disaster after another. And when Democrats pursue solutions to these problems, House Republicans are quick to point, look over there. Look over there at this imagined Fox Network fantasy that can upset you, while meanwhile they seem to have never met a polluter they didn't like or to whom they were unwilling to grant special privileges. More and more families are in fact going electric with their cars, their water heaters, their solar panels, and more. And at some point I expect my family also will make the change with our stove. not because we're being forced by a bureaucrat, but because science shows that it may be healthier for our grandchildren and for our planet. Indeed, in January, the American Public Health Association called on federal agencies to do more to educate the public about these dangers. And more research is exactly what we need, including from the Consumer Product Safety Commission and the Department of Energy, so we can base what we do here on facts, not on fantasy. I yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves. The gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
One of the arguments made from the other side of the aisle that I find absolutely laughable is this notion that the REINS Act might be unconstitutional, might have some constitutional infirmity because it requires Congress to pass the laws instead of the executive branch. And they reference a Supreme Court decision, INS versus Chadha, that doesn't even read on this bill. This bill does not violate the presentment clause, the REINS Act does not, because it requires passage in the House, passage in the Senate, and a signature of the president. It doesn't even apply to the Supreme Court Act that was referenced, or the Supreme Court decision that was referenced. And now I'd like to yield 3 minutes to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Roy.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank the Speaker. I thank my friend from Kentucky. He's completely correct. The only constitutional infirmity is the extent to which we are allowing bureaucrats to make up the law and make up policies without being checked by the branch represented by the people in this body and in the Senate to check them under our Constitution. That is the constitutional infirmity. And to my friend from Texas, who was regaling us on the absurdity, apparently, of our desire to protect the American people from the regulatory state clamping down on their ability to choose how they want to live and have the energy of their choice, which is it? The gentleman from Texas sat down in the well, and he was trying to say, no, we're not trying to ban this. We're not going to do anything about that. When, by the way, the administration literally said, ban stoves. It was a literal quote, and I think when they say something, you should actually believe them. But then the gentleman from Texas went on to say, hey, they want to protect all manners of pollution. We want to stop the scourge of global warming. Well, which is it? Are we banning stoves in pursuit of unicorn energy theory, or are we actually going to allow the American people to be free? The reality is my friend from Texas gave up the joke. Everybody gets it. Everybody knows it. We know exactly where our Democratic colleagues are. They do want to ban the internal combustion engine. They've effectively said so. They do want to get rid of the burning of fossil fuels. They do want to make your energy more expensive for the American people. They literally say so. That is the truth. And the fact is, it's not just energy. We've got the REINS Act trying to restrict the power of the executive branch so we can stop things like a $500 billion student loan bailout, which Nancy Pelosi said the president, quote, does not have that power. That has to be an act of Congress. We want to force schools to allow biological men to compete in women's sports under Title IX. Well, we have an amendment to address that. Force 10.4 million healthcare workers to take a COVID jab or lose their job. Use taxpayer dollars to provide abortions at the VA. Unilaterally turn potentially millions of Americans into felons overnight for owning a piece of plastic attached to a constitutionally protected gun. Use the EPA to regulate gas and coal-fired power plants out of existence. And yes, for the Department of Energy to tell you what type of gas stove you can and can't buy. We get the joke. The REINS Act is necessary, and I support it. But I got to use my last 30 seconds to say this. It is ironic that we are voting on the REINS Act just 1 week after Republicans gave up our debt ceiling leverage to actually get it signed into law. That is precisely how the swamp works, ladies and gentlemen. The REINS Act was in our good bill, Limit, Save, Grow, in April, and we walked away from it last week. Walked directly away from it to cut a deal. And we shouldn't have, instead of engaging in theater where we're going to send it to the Senate for it to die. We should be serious about forcing votes to get it done in this body. I yield back.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to submit a document for the record entitled Gas Stove Use and Respiratory Health Among Adults with Asthma, and the conclusions of which, among adults with asthma, there was no apparent impact of gas stove on pulmonary function or respiratory symptoms.
Without objection.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you very much. I would seek unanimous consent to insert into the record a Politico article entitled, what the Wright's gas stove freakout was really about. That's dated January 14th. First line is, no, President Joe Biden isn't coming for your gas stove.
Without objection.
Okay. I'd also note that in that article, it talks about the multiple studies now that are investigating the impact of gas stoves on asthma, including by the American Lung Association. With that, I would yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I think it is extremely important, and I thank the gentlelady from Pennsylvania for her leadership and my good friend from Kentucky. I think it is very important to come to ensure the American people, and particularly my husband, Dr. Lee, and to proclaim, which we have the ability to do as members of Congress, that no one's gas stove will be lost or taken. In fact, I even heard members say, I'm buying a gas stove or I'm getting a gas stove. Let me proclaim again, no gas stove will be taken from any American ever, ever. It is interesting to be on the floor fighting about freedom and protection of a gas stove. Needless to say, today is June 6th. I stood earlier today to honor D-Day. I know what those men died for. And so it is important to be able to protect consumers from dangerous explosions of any kind. And that is all that our agencies are doing. Again, proclaim, no one's gas stove is being taken away. We will be debating freedom of a gas stove, protection of a gas stove, when children, 8 per day, are dying because of gun violence. I only ask the question. I want my constituents in Houston to know, my constituents in Texas to know, my constituents in the nation to know, as we represent the entire nation, that no one's gas stove needs protection or freedom, because there is an agency that prospectively 3 years is looking to ensure that all gas stoves are safe. We owe that to the American people. And I have now for the 3rd time been engaged with the RAINS Act. Please let me explain to you what that is. It is literally a stop sign of the executive functioning. Because if a regulation is abusive to the American people, we can file, and it often happens, lawsuits to challenge that. And that will be individual consumers or companies. But when you have a regulation, it takes at least a year almost for the input of the American people to be able to say this is a regulation that works or not. But the RAIN Act will require the Congress to intercede every moment. So if it is about asthma, if it is about heart disease and a regulation comes out, if it is about good medication, you won't get it because the Congress will have a rein around. It will be a stranglehold, and we'll get nothing done. The separation of powers, I've done that before as well, out of the Judiciary Committee, and all that will do.
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
I yield another minute to the gentlewoman.
Gentlewoman from Texas is yielded 1 minute.
I thank the gentlelady for her kindness. On Judiciary Committee, all that will do is end separation of powers and basically say that the courts, not because a petitioner or a plaintiff has gone in, but because the Congress intercedes and wants the court to stop life-saving regulations that can be helpful to the American people. So I know that we have to do our duty and be here today. I honor again the men and women who serve in the United States military, and particularly those at Normandy on this day, of which I had the privilege of being there some years ago. But I end my remarks by saying that the American people need us to be serious. Houstonians need us to be serious. Texans need us to be serious. I'm saying that no one's gas stove will be removed from their house, their apartment, but we will offer to you the ability and the instruction to make sure that everything
Gentlewoman's
you have
time
in
has
your home
expired.
is safe for you and
Gentlewoman's
your family.
time has
I yield back.
expired. Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I'd like to tell the story of how the RAINS Act originated. It's one of the most popular bills in Congress. It's the one bill that would do the most to restore the constitutional balance of government. It was an idea from Lloyd Rogers. Lloyd is a constituent of mine. He grew up in an orphanage where he met his wife. They were married, the girl who would later become his wife. They were married for 65 years. Lloyd served during the Korean War. Lloyd came home and he ran for county judge executive, where he served the people of Kentucky once again. And time after time, when he was trying to do the right thing for the people in Kentucky, he was frustrated by laws. But he dug into them. They weren't laws, they were rules. And he couldn't talk to his congressman to get these things fixed so that he could govern locally. So he came up with the idea of the RAINS Act, gave it to the congressman who represented the district before me, and then that congressman brought it here to Congress. That is the way laws are supposed to happen, not by some bureaucrat. I want to move on to the Gas Stove Act here. Despite media gaslighting to the contrary, the Biden administration has effectively declared war on gas stoves using varying rationales. And with that, I'd like to yield to my good friend from New York, 4 minutes.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of the rule which provides for consideration of legislation to protect Americans from the draconian, unaffordable energy policies of the Biden administration. When Winter Storm Elliott hammered my district over Christmas, my constituents endured life-threatening blackouts as the electrical grid struggled to operate through this massive storm. It was the most deadly blizzard in my lifetime. Being one thing that many of my constituents could count on, despite blackouts and frigid temperatures, was the use of their gas stoves. Now, too often I've heard from constituents across Western New York stories of how these appliances were perhaps the only source of heat in their home for folks that were trapped in their homes for 3 days during a deadly storm, which tragically took the lives of more than 40 people. But soon, this access to reliable, affordable energy will be cut off by the ban on gas appliances that this administration has disguised as simply higher efficiency standards. Now, Democrats here in Washington and up in Albany are determined to make the pipe dreams of the Green New Deal a crushing reality for hardworking Americans. Our Governor, Kathy Hochul in New York, not to be outdone by the Biden administration, she's already marched ahead with a statewide ban on natural gas hookups in new residential and commercial buildings. Our state's own energy auditors have already raised alarm, concluding that New York's current path, we face an energy future made up of higher costs and an overstretched, less secure grid. Mr. Speaker, the Biden administration is ignoring decades of proof that embracing natural gas in our energy supply leads to lower emissions, greater efficiency, and more affordability for American families. Heating bills in New York rose by 30% this past winter, and they'll continue to climb if we allow the Biden administration to further regulate Americans out of affordable, reliable energy. I support the legislation considered on the rule that protects American families from this administration's radical Green New Deal priorities, and I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
The other side of the aisle has said that nobody's gas stove is going to be banned. But let me read you a statement from Jeremy Ortiz. He's a spokesperson for the Department of Energy. Our analysis is constructed so that the proposed standard would ensure that products with at least one HIR burner and continuous grates can continue to be available on the market. Here's the punchline. We did go out of our way to make sure that these two features would remain on the market in creating our analysis. Over half the market would remain if this standard is finalized as proposed. Wow, they went out of their way. They bent over backwards to make sure they were only going to ban half of the gas stoves on the market for now. and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. My esteemed colleague from Kentucky talked about the popularity of the REINS Act, but I suggest that that popularity is overstated. The REINS Act has been introduced by its extremist advocates for more than a decade without ever being enacted into law, even when Republicans held both houses and the White House. I would suggest that it's because overall saner heads have prevailed and understood that enactment of the REINS Act is bad for America. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I'll offer an amendment to the rule to provide for consideration of a resolution which states that it's the House's responsibility to protect and preserve Social Security and Medicare for our future generations and reject any cuts to these essential programs. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, Social Security and Medicare are vital to many of our constituents' economic and health security, yet many of my friends across the aisle have called for major cuts to these critical programs. In fact, just last week, Speaker McCarthy announced he was forming a bipartisan commission tasked with looking at budget cuts and suggested that Social Security and Medicare could be on the chopping block, saying, and I quote, "We have to look at the entire budget. The majority driver of the budget is mandatory spending. It's Medicare, Social Security, interest on the debt," end quote. Well, it wasn't too long ago, I remember some of my Republican friends calling the president a liar during the State of the Union when he suggested that Republicans were willing to put Social Security benefits on the chopping block. So now, instead of debating gas stoves and the finer points of administrative law, I'm giving my friends on the other side of the aisle a chance to reassure the American public and unequivocally state these programs won't be cut, not just with rhetoric, but also with their votes. And to discuss our proposal, I will yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from Missouri, Ms. Bush.
Gentlewoman from Missouri is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. St. Louis and I rise today in defense of Social Security because Republicans are trying to take it away. Regular, everyday people in our country have long been promised that if you take a part of your paycheck and contribute to Social Security, you will be able to retire with grace and with dignity. You will have enough money to put food on the table, pay your bills, and keep the heat on in the winter. Nearly 65 million people rely on Social Security benefits, including 131,000 in my home state of Missouri. People with disabilities, retired workers, and their dependents are relying on a fully funded Social Security program. Instead of strengthening and protecting Social Security, extreme MAGA Republicans in D.C. want to end Social Security as we know it. And we're talking about taking away from folks who rely on these benefits, who rely on what this government allows. They want to be able to attack that. People who are already relying on Meals on Wheels, they rely on circuit breakers, they rely in ways that they shouldn't have because they've given their hearts and their souls to working for this country every single day for decades here in this country. They rely on a fully funded Social Security program that extreme MAGA Republicans want to end. They would rather protect gas stoves than protect retired workers or protect seniors. We cannot and we will not allow this to happen. We must ensure that life-saving social programs are here to stay. As Democrats, we are committed to strengthening Social Security. As Democrats, we are committed to strengthening Medicare, to strengthening the programs that everyday people in this country rely on. We will continue to fight back against any extreme MAGA Republicans' attempts to cut these life-saving benefits. We believe in saving lives, and we show up that way because we are the Democrats. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman reserves. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I yield 5 minutes to my good friend from Florida, Ms. Kamek.
Gentlewoman from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my good friend and colleague from the great state of Kentucky. Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong support of this rule, for which would provide consideration of my bill the REINS Act of 2023. The REINS Act would address regulatory actions by requiring every new major rule or regulation that was $100 million or more to an industry proposed by federal agencies to be approved before Congress before going into effect. Specifically, the House and Senate would be required to pass a joint resolution in order for a major rule to be approved by Congress. During his first 2 years in office, the president added more than $400 billion in new regulatory costs to our economy. The American Action Forum found that the new rules in his first 2 years required 193 million hours of compliance paperwork, 193 million hours to comply with new regulations from nameless, faceless bureaucrats who are accountable to no one. According to the Foundation for Government Accountability, regulations cost Americans $2 trillion a year in compliance costs, economic losses, and other expenses. $2 trillion, Mr. Speaker. These costs are due to the ever-increasing regulatory actions that lack proper accountability by Congress. It is beyond time for Congress to reassert its role by placing new checks on regulatory actions that negatively impact Americans from all walks of life. The core question that we have to ask ourselves is this: where is the lawmaking authority vested within our nation? Further, what is the primary principle that our system requires to function? I can give you a hint, but I'm sure you know the answer, Mr. Speaker. It's here. The argument that I hear from my colleagues on the left is that this bill would eliminate the expertise that these nameless, faceless bureaucrats bring. However, I have spoken to thousands of business owners, industry experts, who are continually having to navigate the regulatory regime at the hands of bureaucrats who have never once worked a day in the private sector, never once having worked a day on any of their operations. This bill does nothing to eliminate expertise within the executive branch, but what it does do is give proper oversight authority to Congress, specifically through the regulatory process. Those who argue against this bill are quite literally arguing against their own self-interest, against their role as representatives of we the people. James Madison stated in Federalist 51 that ambition must be made to counteract ambition. And right now, the ambitions of the executive branch have trumped those of the legislative branch. This has gone on for nearly 100 years, regardless of who is in charge in the White House. What a poor and pathetic condition we are in if we as members of the People's House, the House of Representatives, cannot even stand up for the institution in which we serve, that we swore an oath to serve. Quite frankly, I don't care what party holds the presidency. I will come down to this floor every single Congress and fight for this bill and fight for we the people, because this bill, at the end of the day, is about empowering the people, protecting the people from the real swamp, the nameless, faceless bureaucrats that dwell in basements all over Washington, D.C. We in Congress must do what the founders of this nation and the framers of our Constitution expected of us to do: provide a proper, real, equal check to the executive and judicial branches. I know my friends on the other side of the aisle feel the same as me, and I hope that one day politics will allow all of us in Congress to make our founders proud and jealously guard our legislative authority with all the might that we can muster. I urge all of my colleagues, regardless of party affiliation, to support the REINS Act, support your folks back home. Let's reassert our Article I authority, support this rule, and I yield back.
A reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you. I'd inquire whether the gentleman from Kentucky is ready to close.
I'm prepared to close.
Gentlewoman from Pennsylvania has just about 7 minutes remaining.
Thank you. Once again, my colleagues on the right are reverting to their favorite tactic when confronted with real problems in the real world: distraction, to conceal that they are doing nothing. They propose to grind the gears of government to a halt, to impose an extremist ideology that Americans as a whole do not support, just as they threaten to tank our entire economy to impose other extreme cuts that even their own party members couldn't support. They want to ensure that we can do nothing with these bills, that we can do nothing to protect kids from pollutants and dangerous products, to keep businesses from scamming working families out of money, or to ensure that the food people eat every day is safe. Imagine an FDA that can't issue new food safety and drug regulations, or an EPA that can't keep our drinking water clean, or a VA that can't properly serve our veterans, or a Department of Transportation that can't enforce safety standards for cars, trains, or airplanes. This is what the majority is proposing, and it's a very dangerous vision for America. The people who elect us to Congress depend on us to make their and their children's lives better, and doing nothing will not accomplish that goal. If anything, we need to make our government more responsive to the needs of the people. We need to do better, not nothing at all. Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to oppose the previous question in the rule, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
Make no mistake, this administration wants to ban gas stoves. They've said it out loud. 38 to 40% of Americans use gas stoves. I asked the ranking member of the Committee of Jurisdiction for these bills to save our gas stoves. Did he have a gas stove? In fact, he does. I asked him, does it meet the new standards? Would he be able to buy one in the market? He has no idea. He was offended that I would ask such a question. But we have two bills here to protect your gas stoves, the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act and the Save Our Gas Stoves Act. The Federal Interagency Committee on Indoor Air Quality has never identified gas cooking stoves as contributing to asthma or respiratory illness, nor has the Consumer Product Safety Commission nor the EPA ever identified gas stoves as a significant contributor to adverse air quality or as a health hazard. But the other side of the aisle, they just don't like gas stoves. They're reaching for any reason to ban these things. But they shouldn't. It's short-sighted. Number one, what if everybody had an electric stove? How would they get the energy? Well, you would burn natural gas, as many states do, most states do, in a turbine. You would generate electricity in a process that's hardly 50% efficient. Then you would transmit it over power lines to the household, which could be hundreds of miles, at an efficiency of maybe 70% by the time it goes through all the transformers, get to the house, and then heat up the pot. Why not take the natural gas to the house and burn it there directly? Well, many consumers have identified this is a lot more efficient, and that's what they do, and that's why they have gas stoves. They're 3.4 times more affordable than electric stoves. Those who use gas for heating, cooking, and clothes drying on average save over $1,000 a year in their household. And when electricity goes out and you have natural disasters, natural gas is there and usually available to offer life-saving heat and to boil water. I spent about 3 hours yesterday delving into the Department of Energy's regulations and their scientific basis for what they're doing. Because I wanted to know, how can one appliance that burns gas be more efficient than another appliance that burns gas? If you expose CH4 in the presence of oxygen, you get a certain amount of BTUs, and unless you've got some science project with a catalyst, you're going to get the same number of BTUs from both stoves. And when I dug into it, here's what they want to do. They measured efficiency by boiling a pot of water or heating up a pot of water. And they found that stoves with heavy grates or continuous grates that allow for more safety, well, they said those were less efficient because the grate heats up and less of your energy goes into your water. But people aren't cooking water, they're cooking food. And those grates, they provide more heat as the food sits there on the stove. The continuous grates provide safety for somebody who's not strong enough to pick up a pan, yet they're saying those are less efficient. And then in their studies, if you dig deep enough, they admit that a dogged pursuit of efficiency will result in stoves that are less healthy. Because to make it more efficient, you shorten the grates and get the pan closer to the flame. But when the flame impinges on the pan, all of the gas doesn't combust efficiently, and you get carbon monoxide. If all you care about is efficiency, you get more carbon monoxide. What are they doing? They're going after the high-end stoves. That's where they're going first. The ones with the heavy grates, the ones with the thick walls in the ovens that make it easier to cook good food. They're saying they're less efficient, but they're heating up water. They're not cooking food, and they're making assumptions about customers' preferences. And in the realm of electric stoves, they say, well, induction stoves are more efficient, so we'll just make everybody buy new pans because all of your pans don't work on induction stoves. So what, says the Department of Energy? This is a war on stoves. And this will be undone, the war will be undone or stopped, halted, by the Gas Stove Protection and Freedom Act and the Save Our Gas Stoves Act. I want to finish by talking about another of the bills that's in this rule, which is to restore the separation of powers. It's pretty simple, this bill. It's 2 pages long, and it's basically a legislative repeal of Chevron deference. Now, Chevron deference may go away soon anyways, because it's based on a Supreme Court decision that said, you know what? If a regulatory agency does their best and makes a good guess about what they think the law is, well, then the court shouldn't second guess the regulatory agency. That's not the court's job. The court's job is to look at the law as was written by Congress, not to say, stretch it as far as you want, administrative branch. So the Separation of Powers Restoration Act would require the courts to look at all questions of law de novo, including interpretation of constitutional and statutory provisions. This is a wise bill. It should pass. The rule for this should pass. And I also want to note, just in closing, the American people, they don't understand why you want to give up power to the executive branch. They elected you all to come up here and represent them, to live by the laws that we write, but also to be responsible for those laws when our constituents have to live under them. It sounds absurd to the American people that we would want to give up that power that those people have entrusted to us. And whether you're into laws or the structure of government, if you just follow common sense, you know banning gas stoves isn't going to save the planet. It's going to increase prices. It's going to make it harder for low-income and middle-income families to get by if they have to buy more expensive appliances or if they have to cook their food longer. That's the result of these regulations. And all of that could be reined in with the REINS Act. And that's what we need to do. We need to pass this resolution today, get these 4 bills on the floor. We've allowed amendments. Everybody under this rules had 72 hours to read the bill. My, what a concept. Give the American people the time to read the bill as well. And we have read it. We know what these bills do. Put them on the floor. I urge a yes vote on all 4 bills, and most explicitly a yes vote on this resolution. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlemen.
Sorry. I moved the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on order in the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
We request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. The chair announces the Speaker's appointment pursuant to 36 U.S.C. 2302 and the order of the House dated January 9, 2023 of the following members on the part of the House to the United States Holocaust Memorial Council.
Mr. Kustoff of Tennessee, Mr. Bacon of Nebraska, Mr. D'Esposito of New York, Mr. Snyder of Illinois, and Mr. Phillips of Minnesota.
Pursuant to Clause 12, Sub A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of not less than 15 minutes. Less than 15 minutes.
On this vote, the yeas are 215 and the nays are 203. The previous question is ordered. The question is on the adoption of the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
Request a roll call vote.
A recorded vote is requested. Those favoring a recorded vote will rise. A sufficient number having risen, a recorded vote is ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 5-minute vote.
Does any member wish to change a vote? On this vote, the yeas are 206, the nays are 220. The resolution is not adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I have a motion at the desk.
Clerk will report the motion.
Mr. Scalise of Louisiana moves to reconsider the vote on the adoption of House Resolution 463.
The question is on the motion to reconsider. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that, I would ask for the yeas and nays.
Gentleman for New Jersey requests the yeas and nays. Those in favor vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number have risen. The yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question are postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess, subject to the call of the Chair.